Welcome, I'm Sarah, and today's video is going to be about mitochondria and mitochondrial haplogroups, because I'm starting a series of short videos based on common questions and comments that people keep asking about, and haplogroups is one of them. So let's dive in. Mitochondria are much more than just the powerhouse of the cell, because that's the old view, what it would say in biochemistry or medical textbooks, that the mitochondria make ATP and that's it. So first of all, ATP isn't the universal energy currency of biology anyway, and it's the water which is. So the mitochondria make metabolic water as well, but they also make many other things like carbon dioxide, pregnenolone, which is a sex hormone. They can make heat, they can make photons or light. And what they are is they're basically like a relic of a bacterium that now lives in our cells. And they're very strongly programmed by electromagnetism. So light being very important, that light from the outside in the environment needs to propagate through our bodies by a process which we call non-linear optics, so that the mitochondria can use that light signal to know how to adjust our energy production, or whether to make a particular hormone, whether they need to make heat, all sorts of things. So light is very important to how mitochondria work. And Dr. Rees-Mogg is a current researcher on mitochondrial biophotonics, if that's something you're interested in. So food, which is energy and information, goes into the mitochondria and it gets processed down into protons or H pluses and electrons. Mitochondria have their own DNA, and it's separate from the nuclear genome or genetics, which is the DNA inside your cells from your parents. And we have about 21,000 genes in the nucleus, and each cell has one nucleus, but the cells can have hundreds or thousands of mitochondria. So they have their own DNA with 37 genes. So their DNA actually outnumbers ours. Mitochondrial DNA doesn't have something that's called junk DNA, which isn't junk at all. It's tied into very complicated and interesting electromagnetism or electromagnetic properties of DNA, or DNA acting as an antenna, which I'll come back to in later videos when we go into this sort of subject. And then, as I said before, we have about 21,000 genes in our nucleus. And when the human genome sequencing project happened, lots of venture capitalists were very disappointed and went bankrupt, because they were expecting 100,000 human genes so they could patent them all and make designer drugs and cure everybody. But unfortunately, there was only 21,000. And I think actually a cauliflower has more genes than that. So even though we have a greater number of genes in our nuclear genome, the actual amount of DNA, there's going to be more mitochondrial DNA in a lot of cells, just because there are so many mitochondria per cell. So the mitochondria and their 37 genes, they come down your familial side of the family, so maternally. So you inherited your mitochondria from your mother, who inherited it from your grandmother. And most of these genes are for making water and energy in the mitochondria. But then there are 2 ribosomal RNA genes, or rRNA, and then there are 22 transfer or tRNA genes. So this is just so the mitochondria can make proteins for itself, in itself. Anything else or other proteins and things it needs, it imports them. We can think about mitochondria in lots of ways, but I, at the moment, think about mitochondria transforming energy and processing information. So the energy or information that goes in would be light, electrons, water, food in the form of electrons and protons. I haven't put here sort of electromagnetic fields or radiation, because there's obviously helpful and unhelpful biofields, or things like the Schumann resonance. And the subject of electric fields in the body is something very new, but it's something when I've been listening to the Guy Foundation lectures, they're starting to talk about electromagnetic fields inside the body. Then when we actually look at the mitochondria itself, these things go in, and there are particular minerals like copper and magnesium and also iron in the mitochondria. And via a process we'll go into in a moment, we can get things to come out the other end, which would be metabolic water, which is deuterium depleted, ATP, which is, we can say that's energy. Then we've got heat, light can come out, hormones such as pregnenolone, and also carbon dioxide, which is an important signaling molecule. If we look here inside the mitochondria, the electron transport chain, so there's two membranes. We've got the inner and outer membrane, and then we have the 5 complexes that are in the membrane, number 1, 2, 3, 4, and then ATP synthase, and some people just call that complex 5. So the electrons go down the electron transport chain, so we can think of it as electric current or electric flow. And there's particular light properties that these complexes have. So in simple terms, complex 1 is a UV light receiver, and then complex 3, 4, and 5 are red light receivers. Complex number 4 is the one that makes water. So it combines the electrons with oxygen and a proton. So it would be called the terminal electron acceptor. That's oxygen. So that's where the flow of electrons finishes. And then ATPase synthase is still part of this system, but then it, as we'll discover later, can be separated from oxidative phosphorylation, which is when we couple electron flow to making ATP. The other thing about ATP synthase or complex 5 is it spins and it's rotating in an electric current, so it's going to be magnetic. And also this process in the mitochondria of current flowing and rotation is going to create an electric field. So we also know that mitochondria are also an antenna because they emit electromagnetic radiation or magnetic field. So this again is sort of an emerging area of biology of different biofields. So for a long time, people have known about these biofields, but it's something that used to be sort of thought of as a bit wooish. But now the idea about electric or electromagnetic fields in the body being a means of communication is an emerging area of study. So it's very interesting. A little bit more historical about mitochondria. What do we know? So Dr. Doug Wallace showed that mutations in the mitochondrial DNA can accumulate, and this can be part of accelerated aging and disease. And the word heteroplasmy rate is a way to describe mitochondria becoming less efficient. And the respiratory proteins, or the complexes, number 1 to 5, they get more spread out. So the distance between them is bigger. So that means the electrons, when they're tunneling down, are less likely to get to the end. They're more likely to escape into the inner mitochondrial membrane as a free radical and create inflammation. So now we've learned about mitochondrial DNA, a bit about the electron transport chain, we can start to pull it all together to talk about haplogroups. So with haplogroups, what they are is they are SNPs, or genetic variations that have accumulated over time in the mitochondrial DNA, so that the mitochondria can adapt to different environments, as in colder ones. So the environment at the equator is nice and warm and sunny, so you don't really need to make heat. But then when our ancestors migrated north, they needed to be able to produce heat. So this is how these mitochondrial genetic variations arose. So this means the mitochondrial DNA between the haplogroups is different. And that's how you'd find out what haplogroup you are. You do a genetic test. It's something, there's different tests you can get in not the medical section, the hereditability section. So if we compare these areas, these places that people could live, just to keep it simple. So we can talk about the equator, which is hot and sunny, and that's got high UVI, or UVI index, which is about sort of 7 or more all year round. So it can go all the way up to like 13 in some places. Then the northern latitudes, like Northern Europe, Canada, places like that, Scandinavia, it's cold, not so sunny. And then for half the year, the UV index is only 1 or 2. So if we consider the first group, the equator, the haplogroup, or the mitochondrial haplogroup that originated here, would be called coupled. And these are the L0 to 3, the ones that like the sunny, warm places. And then the haplogroup such as HIJ, KS, TU, V, W, these are uncoupled. So these are Northern European we'll just call them mitochondria or mitochondrial haplogroups. So these are uncoupled, the ones that are designed for living places where it's colder with less sun. So if we dive a bit deeper into coupled mitochondria, the Ls, so these, I forgot to say, there are also other haplogroups in between coupled and uncoupled, but that's a bit too much for this video. We just want to keep it simple today. So for the coupled mitochondria, these are efficient at coupling electron flow to ATP production. So that would be oxidative phosphorylation. The whole process, the electrons go down the chain and ATP and water and such like come out, but they're efficient and it's coupled the electron flow to ATP production. So this means that people with an or the mitochondria are very efficient, or the coupled mitochondria are very efficient at producing energy, and they don't produce much excess heat. So they make less heat but more ATP. And like I said before, these coupled haplogroups would be originating from people who lived in tropical warm climates where it's consistently hot all year round. So making heat isn't important. So the mitochondria can make a little bit of heat, but not much. And they can't uncouple. Everything's all seamlessly joined up together and they're efficient. So we can think of someone like Usain Bolt. He will have most likely an L haplotype.
I want to thank my sponsor, Lightwater Scientific, who helped me deliver free valuable information to you and also allow me to have great guests on this channel. Lightwater Scientific produce the purest and most deuterium-depleted water in the world. Depleting or lowering your deuterium has numerous health benefits, from better metabolic health, more energy, greater resilience, less brain fog, increased physical performance, enhanced healing, and healthier mitochondria. Deuterium is an isotope of hydrogen, also known as heavy water, because it's bigger and heavier than regular hydrogen. Even though deuterium makes up only 0.02% of hydrogen, it's found everywhere. Deuterium is a burden to your body because it interferes with the intricate chemical reactions that occur by slowing them down. Deuterium is kryptonite to your mitochondria, and we need healthy mitochondria to produce energy. There's over 60 years of scientific research on the negative effects of too much deuterium on health and also the positive benefits of lowering deuterium in the body. Lightwater deuterium-depleted water is 100% safe and non-toxic. In fact, it's the closest in structure to the metabolic water that your mitochondria produce. Lightwater deuterium-depleted water comes in 5 or 10 parts per million glass or plastic bottles. So level up your health by leveling down your deuterium today. The purchase link is in the show notes, and use code Dr. Sarah for a discount off your order.
Then if we dive a bit deeper into the mitochondria and just look at it in a bit more depth. So when we were talking about the complexes, complex 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, complex number 1, the first one, the UV receiver, that's the leakiest. So if electrons are going to escape out of the electron transport chain, they're most likely to do it there. And then when escaping electrons can be thought of as free radicals, and they can cause inflammation. They can cause the mitochondrial membrane to swell a bit, so the respiratory proteins get pushed further apart. So the efficiency of the mitochondria goes down. So we don't want to be sort of pushing electrons all the time through complex 1, unless, say, somebody lived in a very sunny place like the equator and they were outside pretty much all the time. They can use carbs efficiently because, first of all, somebody with that kind of haplotype or haplogroup, they're already efficient at keeping electrons in the electron transport chain. But also, if somebody was outside all the time making melanin, the melanin has the potential to quench these escaping electrons. So that's why people who live in these kind of tropical environments thrive on the tropical fruit that's there, because their mitochondria, if they're a coupled haplotype, can keep the electrons in the chain. But if not, if they're outside making melanin, that will quench or catch the electrons trying to escape from complex 1. Fat, on the other hand, the electrons from fat, because we were talking about glucose before. So with glucose, I just maybe need to loop back a bit, that in order to make glucose from plants, we have photosynthesis, and plants can't grow unless there's UVA, or they can, but they can't make fruit properly. So the information from the sun, the UV light, gets programmed into sugars and carbohydrates, and the electrons from glucose go in at complex 1, the one that could leak, and they go all the way down the chain. Fat, on the other hand, is different. So the electrons from fat, they don't go in at complex 1. They like jump over it and go straight in at complex 2. So they skip over the leaky complex, and the electrons go down the chain. And this kind of energy use is less inflammatory, because on a quantum level, the way that the information is programmed into electrons, the mitochondria, like I said, which is an information processor, it can process or tell the difference between an electron that came from glucose versus one that came from fat, and it gets treated slightly differently. Then if we come back to our uncoupled mitochondrial haplogroup, so with a coupled one, we just talked about the electrons, they're good at keeping their electron transport chain sort of tight, and if they're in the right environment where it's sunny and they're outside, they'll be very efficient at producing energy, and they don't need to make much heat. So now we need to look at uncoupled mitochondrial haplogroup. So this is when the electron flow isn't fully tied to ATP production, so it can separate or uncouple. And instead of making ATP, it'll make heat. So people with an uncoupled mitochondrial haplogroup are less efficient at making ATP, but more efficient at making heat. And then if we go back inside the mitochondria here, what happens is the electron transport chain makes heat instead of ATP, and the protons re-enter the mitochondrial matrix independently of ATP synthase, because there are proteins called uncoupling proteins that help this process to happen. So it doesn't mean something bad happens if you uncouple. It's not dirty or inefficient, it doesn't make free radicals or anything. So it's not inflammatory to have uncoupled mitochondria. They're just different. So if we now think about the uncoupled haplogroup again, so people with an uncoupled haplogroup need to do cold thermogenesis if they live in a northern latitude or cold places. So they have to make use of this ability to uncouple. So sitting inside all the time and not using the cold is going to create problems, because there's a bit more to sort of diabetes than just food. Obviously, food's a big, massive factor, but because brown fat, which gets stimulated in the cold, is Mother Nature's sort of one of solutions for diabetes, being constantly in a nice warm room all the time when you should be outside in the cold, making your uncoupled mitochondria make heat, has consequences. And then the other factor about this is generally the kind of food that you find in these northern latitudes, there's going to be far less produce, not really that many sweet fruits, and they'll be only around for a few months of the year. So people who live in cold places, and these places usually have bad sun as well, and if they had an uncoupled haplotype, they would do better on a keto diet, because, like I said, they're not as efficient at shuffling the electrons down the electron transport chain. So if they eat diet that has predominantly fat, then the electrons from the fat or from the keto or the carnivore diet is going to go down from complex 2. So it skips over the leaky complex and goes down the electron transport chain. But then if we consider an uncoupled haplogroup in somewhere sunny, say if I moved to Texas or to Costa Rica, I've got an uncoupled haplogroup, but now I've moved somewhere hot, so I don't really need to make heat. But the important thing I would do there is I would have to go outside and get the light there, and then I would also eat the produce that was there. So what I'm trying to say here is uncoupled haplogroups need to do cold thermogenesis, and they're designed to do it because their mitochondria can uncouple easily and make heat. You just need to build up. And living indoors with the central heating on all the time in a cold place and not using the cold isn't the best idea. So now if we think about somebody with a coupled haplogroup, so people with coupled haplotypes, they can do cold therapy or CT or cold thermogenesis, but they don't tolerate it so well because they can't make heat so well. So there's no point forcing, because it's asking your mitochondria to do something they can't do. So if you're a coupled haplogroup, you just don't have the capacity, or mitochondria don't have the capacity to make as much heat as an uncoupled haplogroup. So it doesn't mean they can't do CT, because anything below body temperature is CT, so they can go swimming in the sea and such like. It's just forcing themselves to do 5 degrees C and like 40 degrees F ice baths just wouldn't be appropriate for someone with that haplogroup. So what would happen here? So say if somebody with a coupled haplogroup, somebody with African or sort of Indian origin, and they still had L-type mitochondria haplogroup, moved to, say, the UK or Scandinavia, they would eat the food that grows there. So they'd eat British food, not fish and chips and stuff. I don't mean stuff like that. I mean, they would eat meat and fish and local seasonal vegetables. So they wouldn't eat the food they would normally eat in their environment. So like I said before, people with a coupled haplogroup are more tolerant and more efficient at using carbs, but it depends on their environment. And then they would eat keto in winter just because in those kind of cold places, nothing really grows. However, people with a coupled haplogroup, the Ls, in a sunny place, they would eat the local produce when it's in season, go out in the sun to make melanin to quench the free radicals. So the whole thing about this presentation is that I want to make clear, it's not necessarily about your haplogroup, it's where you live. So you would eat what grows there, and then doing cold thermogenesis is something that you just do less of at a warmer temperature if you're an L or a coupled group. I hope you found this brief introduction into haplogroups helpful, because it's something I get asked about all the time, and I'm sure people will ask things in the comments. So just to reiterate, if you want to know what haplogroup you are, you'd get the information from a DNA test. Then if you're an uncoupled, that means that your mitochondria are able to uncouple electron transport from ATP production and make heat instead, and they can get quite good at this. So doing cold thermogenesis is a good idea if you're an uncoupled haplogroup. People with a coupled haplogroup, they're more efficient at coupling electron transport with ATP production. So they technically, in the right environment, are more carb tolerant, but that's only when they're in their environment. When it comes to cold places and cold thermogenesis, people with coupled haplogroups don't do so well because their mitochondria are just not able to produce the same amount of heat that someone with an uncoupled haplogroup can do. Then there are groups that are sort of slightly in between, but that's something you, from this video, hopefully you can work out for yourself. If you're a partial uncoupler, what that would mean. It would just mean that you can do some cold thermogenesis, but maybe not as much as somebody like me who has a T haplogroup. And then when it comes to choosing food, it doesn't really matter about the haplogroup in lots of ways. You basically just eat local and seasonal. So you eat what is there in your environment and what's growing at the time. And then you have to go outside, because there's no point just staying inside and eating carbs, even if you live at the equator, because you're not getting all the signals from the sun for your mitochondria. And the same with, say, in the UK, you have to embrace the cold and make your mitochondria uncouple and use the food to make heat. So both haplogroups can gain weight and get fat. There isn't one better than the other that's weight gain resistance. And then there are sort of studies now coming out about the different like subgroups. So we've got all kinds of letters and numbers, that there are certain things. I think one of them was collagen production. There's a certain haplogroup that's not very good at that. And then some haplogroups are less prone to diabetes than others. But that's something for you to look up yourselves, because when you see how many different types of haplogroup and subgroup that there's lots and lots. So it's better to find out what you are and then look up the particular traits. By the way, I'll be making other Ask Sarah videos on other topics that keep on and on coming up that people find it hard to get their heads around and need a picture or sort of a slow-paced explainer video like this one. So if you're interested in learning more, I've got a new quantum biology course just about to come out, so you can register for the early bird price. It should be out in 2 weeks because I'm going to El Salvador on the 17th of November. So I want the course to be done before that. So you can register for it to lock in the early bird price. And then you can learn a lot more about quantum biology, dive deeper into things like this. If you want to ask questions and work with me, I have a members group, and the link to that's in the description as well. So thank you for watching, and see you soon.